I've taken the late train for years now. Ever since I started working the night shift downtown, Line 11 became my lifeline. Quiet, predictable, almost meditative in its routine. It cuts across the city in a long diagonal, from the industrial district all the way to the older suburbs where the streetlights flicker and nobody fixes them. I always board at Grand Union. 12:08 a.m., car 3, seat by the window. It's usually empty, aside from a few other graveyard shifters like me. Nurses, cleaners, kitchen staff. We all sit with headphones in, heads down, sharing the silence like some unspoken pact. But last Tuesday, something changed. I was tired, more than usual. I remember glancing at the station sign before I boarded. Line 11 inbound. Normal. I remember the soft hiss of the doors closing behind me, the way the carriage rocked slightly as it started moving. I took my usual seat and stared out into the tunnel, letting my mind drift. But after a while, I noticed something was off. There were too many stops. Line 11 has exactly 12. I know them like a prayer. I even counted them on my fingers sometimes to stay awake. But that night, we passed a 13th. I didn't recognize the name. The sign was barely lit, flickering behind grimy glass. Quarry Heights. That station doesn't exist. I leaned closer to the window, thinking maybe I'd misread it. But the letters were clear, faded, scratched, but unmistakable. Quarry Heights. No one got off. No one got on. The doors didn't even open. Just a long, slow glide past the platform, like the train didn't want to stop. I sat back in my seat, heart tapping a little harder in my chest. I pulled out my phone to check the route map. Still 12 stops listed. No Quarry Heights. When I looked up again, the train was entering a tunnel, a long one, much longer than usual. That was the first time I felt it, like something was pressing down on the carriage. Not air pressure, heavier, more like presence. Like the train had crossed into some place it wasn't supposed to be. And then the lights flickered. Only for a moment. But in that flash of darkness, I swear I saw someone sitting across from me. The seat had been empty before. I was sure of it. The light snapped back on, and the seat was empty again. Just my reflection in the window, pale and wide-eyed, like I'd imagined it. I kept telling myself I'd just nodded off, maybe dreamed it. But when we reached my usual stop, Elder Grove, I didn't recognize the platform at all. No ads, no graffiti, just cracked tile walls and an old analog clock. Its hand stuck at 3:11. The train didn't stop. It kept moving. That's when I realized I had no idea where I was, and that Line 11 wasn't following its route anymore. The train doors hissed shut behind me, and I felt that faint vacuum pull as the cabin sealed tight. I half expected some quirky startup chime or a conductor's announcement, but there was nothing. Just silence. Not the kind of silence you get when people are quiet. The kind you get when something forgets to make noise. No hum of overhead lights. No mechanical rattle beneath the carriage. Just the sound of my own breath and the low whine of tinnitus setting in from the pressure shift. There were maybe 4 other people in the car with me, spread out evenly like they'd each picked their seat with surgical precision to avoid one another. A businessman reading a newspaper that looked wrong. The print was too small, and the date said October 1982. A woman with a wide-brimmed hat who kept her eyes down but clutched an envelope like it was life or death. A kid in a school uniform, eyes locked out the window, unmoving. And a man in coveralls with his boots caked in red clay, chewing something he never swallowed. I sat across from the school kid, hoping maybe he'd glance at me, give some signal that he was just as confused as I was. He didn't. The train began to move, but there was no jolt, just motion, smooth, gliding, like the track had been replaced with air. The windows outside showed darkness, true darkness, not tunnels, not night sky, just void. I pulled out my phone and checked for signal. No service. Of course. The time flickered for a second before resetting to 00. Then the battery dropped from 78% to 2%. I blinked and it shut off entirely. I looked up. The man in coveralls had turned a page in a book that looked more like a maintenance log. Except the pages weren't numbered. They were stamped. He looked at me, just briefly, then back down. His mouth kept moving like he was chewing gum, but there was nothing in his hand. No wrapper, no flavor. The train didn't stop. Not at the next station, not at the next 3. I watched the route map above the door. Each station it should have stopped at blinked softly, then disappeared, one by one. When we should have reached the stop closest to my apartment, Maple and 17th, the name lit up, then dimmed, replaced by a label I didn't recognize. Redacted 0731. The businessman flipped another page. The woman with the envelope tucked it into her coat and closed her eyes. I stood, walked to the door, pressed the emergency call button. Nothing. Pressed it again. Harder. Still nothing. The window beside the button showed only swirling black. It wasn't moving anymore. The train was, but the world outside looked like it was holding its breath. When I turned back around, the kid in the school uniform was staring at me, not blinking, eyes wide, not scared, just aware. He mouthed something, slowly. I tried to read his lips.
Don't get off.
The train slowed. For the first time in what felt like forever, a soft bell dinged, and the lights above the doors flashed yellow. Next stop, Terminus. The moment the word Terminus echoed through the train, the cabin lights dimmed, not off, just lower, like the train was trying to get ready for sleep. I looked back at the kid. He was staring out the window again, jaw clenched. Whatever awareness he'd had a moment ago had vanished, like the thing that let him warn me had been taken back. I sat down, trying not to look obvious. My hands were sweating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The woman in the hat turned her head slightly in my direction. Her mouth didn't move, but her eyes met mine. And in that half-second of connection, I saw it. She was scared, but not of me, not of what was outside. She was scared of what was coming on. The train began to slow. Still no screeching of brakes, no grind of metal on rail. Just pressure, like gravity tilting a few degrees. And then the lights flashed once. The doors opened, and there was nothing, just concrete, pale gray, with no cracks, no graffiti, no dust. The kind of sterile that makes hospitals look lived in. There were no signs, no nameplates, just a row of identical white tiles running along the far wall. The platform was empty, except for the figure. It stood just outside the nearest door, perfectly still. I leaned slightly forward to get a better look, but my brain hesitated, like it didn't want me to see too clearly. Whatever it was tall, gaunt, wearing something between a uniform and a robe. Its face was wrong. Not covered, not monstrous, just built from a geometry that didn't make sense if you looked too long. The air shifted, like someone had opened a door in a sealed house. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. The businessman lowered his paper. He stood and walked toward the open door like it was the most natural thing in the world. His steps were too measured, too even. He didn't look at the creature, just passed it, crossed the threshold, and disappeared into the lightless corridor behind it. The doors stayed open. I stood, backed away instinctively. The man in coveralls finally swallowed, loudly. The woman with the envelope clutched her coat tight, her jaw trembling. Nobody else moved. Then the kid. He turned to me again, but this time he spoke, out loud.
You should sit back down.
His voice was soft, monotone, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. I didn't answer. I just stared at the figure on the platform. Then it moved. Not a walk, not a step. It was just suddenly closer, right outside the door. I couldn't breathe. My body locked up. My legs wanted to run, but the air felt too thick to move through. And then the lights in the cabin flickered. When they came back on, the platform was empty. The figure was gone. The doors hissed shut, and the train started moving again, but not forward. It was going backward. The backward motion wasn't violent. It wasn't even noticeable at first. Just a subtle, almost imperceptible reversal of the hum beneath the floor. But once I realized it, it felt wrong, like watching someone smile without moving their eyes. We were retreating into darkness. I glanced up at the digital map above the doors. The red dot that normally blinked to show our position had vanished. Just an unlit line of empty stations. The kid had gone quiet again. I turned to ask him what was going on, who he was. But he was staring straight ahead, eyes glassy, as if in a trance. Like whatever had spoken through him earlier had gone dormant again. The woman with the envelope stood slowly. Her fingers were trembling as she clutched the seat in front of her for balance. She looked at me. Her lips were pale.
I was supposed to get off at Roslyn,
she said, almost too quiet to hear. That was 3 stops ago. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The man in coveralls spoke next.
This line doesn't have a Roslyn. Not anymore.
That made my stomach drop. Any more? I asked. He gave a slow nod.
They closed that station 10 years ago. Sinkhole, whole platform collapsed. Train doesn't stop there now. Doesn't even pass it.
I looked back at the woman. She looked like she was about to cry, her eyes wide with a creeping, dawning dread.
That's impossible,
she whispered.
I took it yesterday. I always take it. It's my stop.
Nobody answered. Then I heard it. I looked up. The noise was coming from above. A steady, deliberate thud, like something walking across the top of the train car. The coveralls man stood, looking up too. "Tell me you hear that," I said. He nodded once, and then the lights dimmed again. Not off, just reluctant. The rhythm above grew faster, louder. Not footsteps anymore. It was scratching now, something dragging metal against metal in long, sweeping arcs. The envelope woman covered her ears.
Make it stop. Please, make it stop.
Then the train lurched. Everyone stumbled. The man in coveralls hit the pole hard enough to curse. The boy didn't even flinch. The train had stopped moving, but the lights didn't go out. They stayed dim, flickering. I moved to the door, heart hammering in my chest. There was no station outside this time, just a tunnel. Damp concrete, dripping with condensation. Moss and grime streaked the walls. We weren't at a stop. We weren't meant to stop. That's when the emergency intercom crackled to life. Then a voice, garbled, low, distorted, like it was being played backward. It said one word, not a station name, not a direction, just exit. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere. Exit. No instruction, no chime or automated follow-up. Just that single distorted word, echoing from the intercom like a dare. The man in coveralls was already at the nearest door, hands searching the emergency release lever. He gave me a look, then yanked it. The doors creaked open. A rush of cold air swept in, thick with mildew and copper. The tunnel outside looked ancient, older than the metro, older than the city itself. The walls were curved stone, not concrete. Chisel marks lined the ceiling like ribs. The boy didn't move. The woman with the envelope was sobbing now, mumbling something to herself over and over. I was halfway through stepping out when I stopped. The tunnel floor wasn't flat. It tilted down, subtly at first, then more steeply as it vanished into the dark. I turned back toward the others.
"I think this is what it wants,"
the man in coveralls said quietly. What wants?" He shook his head.
"Not sure, but the train wasn't supposed to stop. Something else stopped it."
The kid finally spoke again, but his voice was different, deeper, like someone speaking through him with a mouth that didn't quite know how.
"It's not a train anymore,"
he said.
"It hasn't been for a while."
The envelope woman screamed. The kid turned to me.
"We have to go down."
"Why?"
"Because if we don't,"
he said,
"it'll just keep taking us further. And there's no track after the next bend."
I looked back out into the tunnel. The walls were breathing, not literally, but the shadows pulsed with a slow, rhythmic motion, like something sleeping under the stone, like lungs. The man in coveralls went first. He stepped into the darkness without hesitation, flashlight in hand. I hesitated. The envelope woman looked at me.
Please,
She said,
don't leave me here. I don't want to be alone with it.
"With what?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to, because when I turned to look back down the train car, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Every seat was full. Dozens of figures sitting motionless. They hadn't been there before. Their clothes were wrong, tattered, out of place, like they'd stepped out of time, mud-streaked, burned. Uniforms from wars long over, dresses with soot-black hems, children with gas masks for faces. One of them raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed at me.
Out.
The kid said. I stepped into the tunnel, and the doors closed behind us. We walked in single file. The tunnel sloped downward gradually, but it was enough to notice the strain on my calves. The air was thick, humid, but stale, like nothing had moved through it in years. The man in coveralls led with his flashlight. The beam was weak against the darkness, barely stretching more than 10 feet ahead. Stone walls on either side bore the marks of hand tools, not machines. They were uneven, crumbling, and slick with moisture. The boy stayed right behind me. His breathing had changed, slower now, controlled, like he wasn't afraid anymore, or maybe like he'd been here before. The envelope woman kept muttering. I tried to ignore it, but one line kept standing out, repeated over and over like a mantra.
The man with no station. The man with no station.
What does that mean? I whispered. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet.
He walks the tunnels. He doesn't need a train. He used to be someone, but now he's just a path.
What? She didn't answer. We kept moving. 10 minutes in, we passed a metal door embedded in the wall. It had no handle, just a series of rusted bolts around the frame and a triangle etched into the surface. Inside it, a vertical slit, almost like an eye. The man in coveralls stopped.
You hear that?
We all went still. At first, nothing. Then, it came from behind the door, like fingers drumming, or teeth. We didn't wait to find out which. We moved on. The passage narrowed and the walls closed in until our shoulders brushed stone. Eventually, it opened into a low, circular chamber with a domed ceiling covered in black soot. A fire pit sat in the middle, cold but recently used. Half-charred scraps of paper lay scattered around it. The flashlight beam caught a corner of something tucked in the stones. A notebook. I bent to pick it up. Most of the pages were soaked, ruined by mildew, but one was still legible. Day 12. Still no exit. The loop won't break unless something outside closes it. The boy knew. He always knew. But they took his name. Without a name, you can't leave a mark. I looked up at the kid. He just stared at the wall, then said quietly,
We're close.
The envelope woman screamed again, clutching her arm.
It touched me.
She whispered.
I felt it.
There's nothing there, I said, scanning the room. But she showed me her skin. Fresh fingerprints, long, thin, burned into her bicep like steam marks. The rumble returned, louder now. The walls trembled. Something was coming. The man in coveralls waved his flashlight around the chamber and found another tunnel, narrower but sloping up.
This way.
We ran. As we climbed, I looked back one last time. The darkness behind us moved. Not a shadow, a shape. Crawling, bending, stretching to fit the walls like it wasn't limited by bones. And just before we turned the corner, I saw a flash of something impossible. A conductor's hat, perched on nothing, floating in the dark. We didn't stop running until the incline leveled out. The new tunnel was drier, dustier, as if no moisture had touched it in decades. Our footsteps echoed longer here, louder than they should have, like the sound had room to bounce off more than just walls. I checked behind us. Nothing followed, but the boy suddenly halted, holding out an arm.
There's a line here.
He said. What? He pointed at the floor. I didn't see it at first, but once he stepped aside, it was obvious. A straight cut in the concrete, thin and deliberate, stretching from one wall to the other, as if someone had scored the floor with a blade. On the other side of that line, everything looked sharper. Same tunnel, same walls, same dust, but the shadows fell differently. The light hit them wrong, and the air shimmered just slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. What is this? I asked. The boy didn't respond. He stepped over the line and looked back at me.
You don't have to come. You'll still remember it this way.
What are you talking about? He tilted his head, like listening for something.
If you step over, you'll lose the anchors. That's the price. No pictures, no calls, no names.
What anchors? He didn't answer. Instead, he held out his hand. Behind me, the others were silent. I looked back. The envelope woman was crouched against the wall, whispering again. The man in coveralls was staring at the cut in the floor, jaw clenched like he already knew what we were walking into. I crossed the line. And everything changed. The walls grew wider, the ceiling higher. My ears popped like I'd changed altitude, but we were underground. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a massive underground station, but not like anything I'd ever seen. No signs, no benches, just a wide cement platform with tracks that vanished into complete darkness in both directions. No lights, no safety rails, no logos. But the weirdest part? A train was already waiting. Completely still, no hum of energy, no announcements. Just there, 6 cars long, old design, not retro, but archaic. Every window blacked out, the front bore no number, just a circular brass emblem where the line indicator should be, engraved with something unreadable. The boy walked straight toward it. Wait, I called. He stopped at the 3rd car, placed his hand on the door, and whispered something. The door slid open. Are you sure about this? I asked. He nodded.
It comes when I call. That's what I am now.
What do you mean? What you are? But he stepped inside. I turned back toward the others. The envelope woman hadn't moved. She was rocking now, clutching a torn piece of paper, her eyes fixed on something none of us could see. The man in coveralls looked at the train with open hatred.
This isn't the end.
He said,
It's a trade.
What kind of trade? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a folded map from his back pocket and placed it on the platform. It was a subway map, but not of our system. This one had no names, no transfer points, just dots, lines, and 3 empty circles at the edges, labeled with symbols that made my stomach twist when I looked at them too long. The man pointed at one of the empty circles.
That's where the kid's going. It's always where the kids go.
Why? He didn't reply. But then the train shuddered, just once, like it was waking up. Inside, the boy was no longer visible. I stood frozen. The door to the train car slowly sealed shut behind the boy with a low hydraulic hiss. I didn't see him through the windows anymore. I wasn't even sure they were windows. More like panes of something too dark and thick to see through. Not out of power, more like an intentional dimming, a warning, or maybe a shift. When they came back on, the train looked older, dustier, like time had passed for it, but not for us. What happens if we get on? I asked. The man in coveralls didn't answer, but the woman finally stood, her eyes locked onto mine.
You don't get on unless it takes something first. Always the price. That's how the rail remembers you.
She turned toward the train. I grabbed her arm. Wait, what does that mean? Takes what? But she just smiled faintly.
I gave it my daughter's name.
She said.
She's alive up there. Happy. Doesn't know me. Never cried for me. That's how I knew the trade worked.
She pulled free and approached the last car, whispered something I couldn't hear. The man and I watched her step inside, the door sealed behind her. No motion from the train. Just a pause, like it was considering. Then a sound I'll never forget. Not a horn, not brakes. Something older, like iron bones shifting under strain. It rumbled through the tunnel, deep and low, like the earth itself reacting to the train's presence. The man sighed.
You gonna go too?
He asked me. I shook my head. I didn't come here for this. I just wanted answers.
Then you're gonna need to keep walking.
He pointed toward the end of the platform, where a narrow door stood open, revealing another staircase spiraling downward, carved in stone instead of poured concrete. Wait, where does that lead? He didn't answer, just picked up his strange subway map, slid it back into his pocket, and walked toward the stairs. I followed him. Every step down felt like it took us deeper than the physical world should allow. We passed rusted pipes, fossilized cables, layers of markings on the walls that looked like graffiti, but in no language I knew. Just concentric symbols and long vertical scratches, like something had been dragged across the surface in patterns. The man finally spoke.
This place, it feeds on movement. As long as someone's riding, someone's walking, someone's forgetting, it keeps going.
Then why go deeper?
Because if it feeds on movement, then somewhere down here, it must stop. There must be an end.
We stepped off the last stair onto a path carved from bedrock. No more tunnel, no more walls, just a chasm ahead, and a narrow platform of natural stone, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. But there were rails again, old wooden ones, warped, cracked. And a cart, not a train, a single wooden cart on metal wheels, resting on the rails like it hadn't moved in 100 years. There was something written on it in chalk. "Next stop, your fare." The man turned to me.
This is where I got off last time.
"You've been here before?" He nodded.
That's why I still remember. It doesn't take everything if you know when to jump.
"What's at the end?" But again, no answer. He stepped into the cart and looked back.
Your turn.
I hesitated before stepping into the cart. The rails looked brittle. The cart itself creaked under the man's weight like dry bone. I tested it with my foot. It didn't move. He pulled a lever. Somewhere below us, something groaned, metal on stone, deep and slow. And the cart lurched forward. Not fast, not violently, just steady, like it had been waiting. We rolled ahead into darkness. There was no tunnel anymore, no ceiling, no walls, just a void to either side, a narrow rail bridging black nothing. I couldn't even see the ground below. The only light came from the cart, a faint lantern bolted to the front, flickering in rhythmic pulses. Not electric, not fire, something older. The man finally spoke again.
This is what's underneath the system, before the rails, before the cities.
He was speaking like someone reciting a script, not telling me, remembering.
Line 11 wasn't built, it was revealed, dug up. There were maps they weren't supposed to follow, stories they weren't supposed to believe.
I stared out into the dark. Occasionally I thought I saw movement, shadow pacing along the sides of the rail, staying just out of view, but they never stepped into the light. "What's at the end?" I asked. He smiled faintly.
You ever dream of falling and wake up before you hit the bottom?
"Yeah."
This is where that fall ends.
Ahead I saw something, a faint glow, a station, but not like any before. It was ancient. The platform was made of stone, worn smooth by years of wind or water. Thick columns lined the sides, each carved with marks similar to those we passed on the stairwell. Runes, symbols, all converging toward a single emblem at the center of the wall. A circle broken by a single vertical line. The cart slowed. The wheels ground to a stop. The man stepped out and walked toward the platform's edge. No hesitation now. I followed him, but every step felt like my body resisted, like I was walking through water or memory. I touched the nearest column. It was warm. The man looked at the wall and placed his hand over the emblem.
Every traveler leaves something behind. Sometimes it's a name, sometimes a face, sometimes a future.
The wall shuddered. A seam appeared in the stone, a doorway, cracking open down the middle. Beyond it, only light. Not blinding, not bright, but true. He turned to me one last time.
You came here for answers, but the price isn't knowing, it's remembering. Once you see it, it doesn't let you forget.
"What is it?" He stepped through the door and vanished. I was alone. The cart behind me had crumbled, gone, as if it had aged to dust the second we stepped off. The rails ended here. There was no going back, just the open doorway, the light, and the feeling that whatever waited on the other side already knew I was coming. I took a breath and stepped forward. I stepped through the doorway. The light didn't blind me. It welcomed me, like stepping into warmth after a bitter wind. But what I saw wasn't a room. It wasn't a cave or a chamber. It was a space between. A vast, seamless landscape that felt unfolded. Like a map turned inside out. Land stretched in impossible geometries. Rolling hills that looped back on themselves. Rivers that ran upward into a sky with no stars. The horizon was a circle. The world here curved in every direction. And in the center of it all, pulsing like a heartbeat in the stone, was a tower. Black, spined, made of something older than concrete. It didn't rise into the sky. It anchored it, like it was holding this world together. I took a step forward and the ground didn't crunch or echo. It remembered me. I could feel it. The place was aware. I don't know how long I walked. Could have been minutes, could have been days. But eventually, I reached the tower. There was no door, just a hollow in the side. And inside, a room that was my own. Same lamp from my desk, same coat I lost in college, same photo of my sister framed on a table that shouldn't exist. Everything was familiar, but not mine. As if someone had recreated the memory, not the thing itself. I turned. Behind me, something was watching. It wasn't a creature, not in the way we think. It was absence. Like someone had cut a human-shaped void into reality, and that void was staring. I couldn't move. It stepped closer, noiseless, weightless, and I felt my thoughts rearranging. Not pain, not fear, but recognition. It reached out, not physically, but through something deeper, through my memory. And that's when I understood. This place, this tower, wasn't just hidden. It wasn't lost. It was waiting for people like me. People who fall through cracks in reality, who chase lines that don't appear on maps. The train didn't bring me here. I did. I turned back to the room and saw something on the desk that hadn't been there before. A notebook. My handwriting. Pages filled with entries I hadn't written yet. Dates that hadn't come. Descriptions of places I hadn't been. And at the bottom of every page, one phrase repeated. Line 11 doesn't end. Suddenly, I heard it. Faint, echoing from behind. The sound of a train. Far off, getting closer. I looked toward the curved horizon, and there, racing along a rail that hadn't existed before, was a car, the same one I rode down. Only now, someone else was inside, their face obscured, staring forward, headed this way. I backed away from the desk. The notebook slammed shut. I wasn't the only one. This wasn't a place. It was a cycle. A loop built beneath the world, feeding on curiosity, on obsession, on the need to know. And now I'm part of it. If you find this, if you follow the signs, if you ever step off at the wrong station and see no one else on the platform, don't look down the tunnel, because the next cart might already be on its way. And it might not be stopping,